everyone. Thank you to another one of our Facebook Lives. Before I get into the heart of the content today, which is all about why you should learn to love and sew linen, I want to go over again one of our programs called So Confident. I know I sound like a broken record, but there's a reason I am going to talk about this again. So this is one of the magazines from this year, issue 3 of Series 9. So it came out in March, and we have a whole feature on linen, all about the properties of linen and some inspiration of what to sew with linen. But also in our magazines that you can either download off of in your account or go to issue.com and find the magazine. We also do a feature once a month on a person or a company or just something interesting. Betsy always finds these fantastic topics to talk about. And back in March, we featured an article about City Girl Farm, which is a company in Kansas City, Missouri, owned by Sally Jane Linville. And back in college, Sally Jane produced 2 chicken footstools for one of her projects in college. And one thing turned into something else, and all of a sudden she has this fantastic business in Kansas City of making these incredible chicken footstools. All right, so yesterday was my birthday. And I came downstairs yesterday morning, and sitting on my breakfast table was a chicken, one of the chickens. And it made me realize that my husband listens, because I had been raving about these chickens, thinking, oh, I have to have one of these. I had made plans to go to Kansas City, go to the studio, and I didn't go. Something came up, and my husband and I didn't go. So this is the chicken. Now, I have a hard time believing that I'm going to use this as a footstool, but that's actually what it is made of. The core of it is this wood egg shape, handmade by an artisan in Kansas City. Excuse me. I always have trouble getting going with my voice in the morning. And then the feet and the beak are bronze, and that's made by a different artisan. And then Sally Jane and I think her mother spend time embellishing these chickens with all kinds of fibers and wool and yarn and fabrics and threads and whatever, and every chicken is different. You adopt a chicken when you buy one, and mine is Little Margarita. So I'm so happy to show you Little Margarita. I was thrilled to get Little Margarita. She's become part of our family. I have another friend, Stephanie, in Topeka, who owns 1 or 2 or 3 of them, and we've talked about a play date. So maybe our chickens will get together. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the company, first of all, in Kansas City. City Girl Farm. You can look it up on the internet and look at all the chickens that have been adopted. But mostly I want to tell you about the fact that this is the kind of thing that we do feature in our magazine once a month in So Confident. So Little Margarita has to go away for the moment, so I have a little more room to operate. All right, so let's talk about linen. Long before I really learned to love linen for garments, I was making a lot of pillows and writing books about pillows. And back in 1991, I wrote a book called Sewing Stylish Home Projects. Now, you can still get this book. I don't sell it, but you can get it on Amazon for $1.48. I looked it up yesterday. So obviously it was not a big seller, but nevertheless, I like the book. It's still great, and even though it's 10 years old, I think a lot of the projects are still really current. Actually, the photograph on the front of the magazine is my master bedroom at home, and most of the products that were made for this bedroom are made out of linen. So I thought I'd show you a few of them. This is just the simplest of project. This is a linen, handkerchief linen, which is lightweight linen, pillow, but the fringe is made out of folded pieces of grosgrain ribbon. So simple way to make your own fringe. You know, it's really difficult to find the perfect fringe and trim for pillows. You can make your own. Here's one where the base of it is a rather textural, raw sort of linen, and then I've used silk organza as a pleated sort of envelope closure for it, with another piece of linen and a button and a couple of slits in the linen to help hold that all together. So that's another natural linen pillow. Speaking of linens, you know, how many of us have that bag, box, tub, whatever in the basement or the closet of all of the old linens that we got from our aunt or grandmother or mother or whoever, or maybe we collect them ourselves, but we don't always use these same kind of products anymore. And this happened to start out as a dresser scarf. So this particular piece of embroidery would have been at both ends. So I sort of reluctantly cut off one end, hemmed it, and created this envelope that turned into a pillow. It was just the easiest thing to make. And I made some other things as well. I found this old journal cover using some scraps and pieces of linen, again the silk organza with a little bit of serging, and making the little spaces for the pencils. I opened this up today, first time I've looked at this journal in a long time, and the journal is from 1992, which would have been about a year after I bought the sewing workshop in San Francisco. There's all kinds of goodies in here which I'm going to dig out, some really interesting pockets and how to make a French seam and how to do a flat fell seam, which we're going to talk about not today but in another session. I'm going to show you our very special flat fell seam technique. But then the easiest thing to do, I realized I had made a whole series of linen napkins. Pure linen, you know, that's what they used to use. I used a rolled hem on my serger to hem the edges of them. But I don't know if you can see this, but I did a little bit of tone-on-tone machine embroidery in an Asian motif. And I have no idea what this motif says. I hope it's something nice. But nevertheless, so I have a whole set of 12 napkins. And now that I look at it, all the motifs are different. I'd forgotten I'd done this. I don't do much machine embroidery anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't own all the stuff to do it, the machine and the threads and the software and all that. But anyway, treat yourself to a nice set of beautiful linens, or give them away as wedding gifts or just presents to anyone. This is kind of a no-brainer project to use your linen. And don't forget about the book at Amazon. I also wrote another book. I used to really make a lot of pillows, and I've written about 3 books on pillows. This was the last one I wrote, which is called So Sensational Pillows. And there are, I don't know, 50 or so pillows in here. Some are linen, some are silk, some are other things. But, you know, we've gotten into this routine of just buying a simple, inexpensive pillow, that's square or rectangular, not anything particularly special, but these are pillows that have great details, great ways to make flanges, edges, do interesting corners, including some miters, which I'm going to teach you in a minute. So we do sell this book, and this book is on sale for the next week. That's regularly 24 something or other, I think, $24.95, and we have it marked down to, I'm not sure, something lower. So it's on the website. We'll check it out for you. But at any rate, this book is one of my books, and it's still a beautiful book. The photography was done by my favorite photographer in New York, Jack Deutsch, and the photography is just exquisite in this book. All right, so let's talk about some garment making out of linen. There are really 2 weights of linen that we specialize in here. We have a mid-weight linen and a lightweight linen. And I think of the lightweight linen for tops generally and the mid-weight linen for bottoms, but then you'll realize after I show you things that we mix that all up and we make mid-weight on the top and lightweight on the bottom. So it really doesn't make any difference. It's just the denier of how the fabric is woven as to whether you like the lightweight or the midweight. So this is the Whistles shirt. And you know, there's just something about a loose-fitting, simple shirt, even long-sleeved, rolled up for summer. This is handkerchief linen. And you can see that what we call the flanges of the Whistles, this is the Whistles as the long version, this is the short, but normally the pattern has these flanges both in the front and the back. And you can leave them on there, or as you can see with this one, you can leave them off, and you get a totally different look. So this is from the Bells and Whistles pattern. This is the Whistles version of that pattern. All the patterns that I'm going to talk about today almost are on sale this week. So this is normally $22.95 and it's on sale for $18 for another week. So that's the bells and whistles. So for bottom weight, here's the mid-weight in the West End pants. And you can see that this is our wide leg pant, but even the mid-weight, when washed, is wonderfully drapey, very soft, very comfortable to wear. And a pant like this for the summer is just, lets air through and you just feel very cool in it. So this is a one of the many colors that we have of the mid-weight linen. Another pant that I like for summer that also has a little bit wider leg, not terribly wide, but a little bit wider, is the Valencia Pants. Now, I've done this in a print. We don't have a lot of linen prints left. We have a few. I'm going to show you one in a minute on the wall. But this is handkerchief weight, so I broke the rules from the mid-weight and went ahead and used the lightweight for the pants. The Valencia pants are nice because they have this flat portion across the front and elastic in the back, but I like them mostly because they don't have a side seam. And so if you're making something with a print or a motif, you don't have to worry about matching at the side seam because there is no side seam. So this is the simplest pant that we have to make. Anytime you don't have a side seam, then you tend to look more straight up and down. So it's a very slimming pant. Interestingly enough, just as a side note, these fit a little bit differently, the Valencias and the West Ends. You want to make sure you make the Valencias large enough. Sometimes I go up a size in the Valencias, or maybe I go down a size in the West Ends, but in a previous couple of videos I talked about how to measure your hips and measure the pants, and you want some ease, at least 4 inches of ease in these Valencias, and that much or more in the West Ends. I did line this because it's a handkerchief linen, lined it in a mesh fabric. You could line it in silk georgette, silk organza, a lightweight batiste or voile, or maybe not. It depends on the weight of the fabric. Not all lightweight linens need to be lined for sure. Another fun garment for summer is the Balboa. I love this shirt. It's very oversized. I mean, it's extremely oversized, and it's meant to be. So this is the short version, and obviously this is the long duster version. The longer version has these great big pockets, wonderfully droopy pockets. The front closure is a hidden placket, and this again is our signature collar and stand that's all built into one, so it's not a separate unit, two separate units, it's one unit. Makes it much easier to construct. And then I like the way this tab brings up the sleeve. We've used this pattern for a lot of things, including raincoats, outerwear, but consider it in linen for summer, and it makes a great open jacket, shirt, whatever. Another pattern that I like for summer is the Florence. You can see that when I make something in linen, I'm allowing some extra space. I'm not making fitted garments in linen. I want them to drape. I want them to want you to feel the coolness of the fabric. And so these are garments that, this particular garment fits really nicely through the shoulders and the bust. And then obviously there's extra room in the hips. And there's this fun tuck in the front that creates the shape and really adds interest to this. This could be a short sleeve version. I've actually put other sleeves like the Liberty sleeve that's a shorter sleeve in this, so I've eliminated the cuff and the vent, or you can just cut it off and hem it and make it a much simpler garment. So that's the Florence. So I have on the Madrid shirt, which we don't talk about very much, but all I did to this garment was simply shorten the sleeves. I didn't do anything except shorten them. Now, I don't know what happens. I'm sure this never happens to you, but I remember measuring the pattern. I distinctly remember measuring the pattern and saying, I want a 10-inch sleeve. So I added my hem allowance. In this case, it was 5/8 of an inch, so I had 10 and 5/8 of an inch. So I cut out the sleeves. I'm getting ready to insert the sleeves in on on Sunday when I made this and realized, I don't think this looks like 10 inches. And I measured it, and there's 7. So I have no idea how that happened, but I'm just telling you that this length of a sleeve is 7 inches when I meant it for it to be 10. I'm sure you won't make that mistake, but I make those mistakes all the time. But I like this as a short sleeve shirt, and I like this without the 2 extra buttons at the collar so that it's more open. It doesn't feel so closed up as a funnel neck. So with all the space and room, I feel very cool today. It's a very summery color. And I'm wearing this with my Hudson pants. Don't forget that we have all of these fabrics in the linen and viscose blend. We just got a lot of colors in: white, off-white, blush pink, a couple of blues, some oranges. So check this out, because that viscose linen is a wonderful pants fabric, and my white pants are sort of my basic summer pants. We also, this morning, just like an hour ago, got a big box in of new fabrics, of some fantastic, like 12 colors of this, what I'll call aged linen. It's already washed, it's already rumpled, it's ready to go, just like it is, and it just has that it doesn't have any finish on it, I'll call it, so it feels vintage and aged and used and worn, and I love that about this. It's one of those kinds of fabrics that's going to be a real staple for us, I think, in our inventory. Now, for the other pair of basic pants that I'm wearing this summer, these are my Picasso Pants, and this is a railroad stripe linen. We have this railroad stripe in a wider one, which is what this is, and a slightly narrower version as well. So this, in my opinion, just goes with everything. Obviously, I could wear it with what I have on, and I could put any color with this, any color. I can't think of a color that wouldn't go with it. So whereas a few weeks ago I was talking about my black cotton and lycra as my most favorite fabric, well, this is a close second, if not overtaking it for the moment. But this is my basic summer pants in Picasso's in the railroad stripe. So what we have on sale right now are the lightweight linens, the midweight linens, and they are 20% off. And some of the patterns that I've talked about, the Florence, the Madrid, the Balboa, and the bells and whistles are all on sale for $18. They're printed patterns. This is an array of the lightweight linens, and you can see when you look at them, they're very drapey. You don't think of linen as being particularly drapey, but these are already pre-washed. Not all of them, not this one, but most of them are. And then this is the one print that we have that I love. That's this fabulous rose. Is that a rose? No, that's some other flower. I don't know my names of flowers, but anyway, this big bouquet of flowers. I love this blush pink. This is such a great color for this summer. But beautiful array of some of the colors that we had in the lightweight linen. All right, so let's talk about why you want to sew with linen. I know what you're thinking. You don't like wrinkles. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Linen wrinkles. But one of the things that really helps is that you pre-wash your linens and dry them. And it takes all the resins, if there are any, it takes some of the finishes off of linen, and it becomes this wonderfully rumpled fabric. And I think if you start to wear linen, you will realize that it is the summer's best fabric. It's a really old fiber. I mean, 10,000 years ago, they were using linen as fibers to make clothing. So it's really old. It's been around forever. It has this wonderful combination of being really beautiful, but it's a strong fiber as well. It comes from the flax plant. What I like about it is that it's long before we were talking about eco fabrics and organic fabrics and all of that. It really is one of the original ecologically friendly fabrics because every part of the plant is used. And I like that about that. There's nothing that's thrown away or discarded. Every single, from the stem, every part of the plant is used. It's the coolest fabric to wear in the summer because it absorbs 20% of moisture before you feel that it's wet. So it's a very comfortable fabric to wear. As a matter of fact, I'm a tennis player, and in Kansas it can be pretty hot to play outdoors in July and August. And yes, I have all those wicking fabrics that, you know, Nike and all of those companies tell you need, but the fact is there are times when it's super hot. I will put on a white linen top, handkerchief linen top, and play tennis in it, and I'm much, much cooler than all of those fabrics that are supposed to make you cool. So I'm telling you, it's a breeze to sew, and it's lovely to wear, and the colors are amazing. It holds the dyes, and it washes beautifully. So once you get your fabric and you've pre-washed it, and by the way, I probably am going to continue to wash the garment, but I'm not necessarily always going to dry it again. The drying is, I think, what really breaks the fiber down, any fabric, not just linen, over time. And I think that my clothes just look a little bit worse if I continue to dry and dry and dry the fabrics. But washing is no problem. But the first time I'm going to wash and dry the fabric to prepare it, and then I'm going to maybe wash the garment, but not necessarily dry the garment. I'm going to hang dry that and press it. Maybe I'm going to press it, maybe I'm not. Depends on what the rumple looks like and how much I really like it. But they really get soft, and they really get nice and soft and drapey. So I'm going to cut my fabric out single layer. I know you don't like me to say that, but it's true. That's the only way that you can really get a really perfect straight of grain. And linen is one of those fabrics that does not tear. So you're going to have to pull a thread and follow that missing thread across the width and cut it out, and be very careful when you lay that out on your table to make sure it's along two right-angled lines and you're cutting straight of grain. It's the only way your garments are going to hang really well, is if you pay attention to straight of grain. It's amazing. You can think that something's been cut well, and then you pull a thread and you realize, oh, it's off a half an inch or 6 inches, and it's time to square things up. I'm going to use tracing paper and a tracing wheel to mark things, and we use a very special tracing paper that we get from Japan. It's double-sided, and it is waxy, so it does not disappear when you press it, but it disappears if you need it to go away. Ultimately, it does wash out. But I use the type of tracing wheel that has the serious points on it. These are not rounded points at all. They're very sharp. So check out the papers. I talk about tailor tacks, and I do occasionally use tailor tacks, but it just seems to me like for casual clothing, summer clothing, linen clothing, I'm going to do the fastest and quickest, and I'm going to use my double tracing paper and tracing wheel on that. I also use a chalkener when I'm marking things as I'm sewing. So our little chalkener is a very fine line of chalk, and I realize I've picked up a yellow one, which I never use, by the way. We must have one around here that keeps wanting to be used, but I use white, and we only sell white, and I've had trouble with colors coming out of all kinds of fabrics, including linen, so you want to avoid yellow and pink and red chalks of any brand, any kind, but white chalkeners. And then for things like buttonholes, button placements, I will use a friction pencil or a pen from, who makes this? Pilot. And this does go away with heat, so the pressing and steam will take this away. But I don't tend to mark my buttonholes until I'm ready to go with them, and so at the very end of the process, I'm using this friction paint for marking, or pencil for marking my buttonholes. For interfacing, I don't use much, but occasionally. On the Madrid top, I've used no interfacing, but if I'm making, let's say, a Florence or Balboa, and I want to interface the collar and maybe even do a second layer through the stand of the collar, I'm going to use our ultra shear interfacing. And it's incredible. It's, as you can see, a tricot. People have been asking me about this, which means it's a knit, so there's some give to it. And I use it both on knits and wovens, but it's perfect for linen because it's barely there, but just enough support to make the difference for things. I'm going to use cotton thread. There are two weights of cotton thread. There's a 50 weight, which we use most commonly for sewing, and there's a lighter weight one, which is 60 weight. I don't know why the numbers, I mean, that should mean something to me, but it makes no sense. But the 60 weight is lighter weight than the 50 weight. And I use the 60 weight for the lightweight linens and handkerchief linens and sheer linens, and I use the 50 weight for the regular midweight and heavier weight linens. If I'm basting something, I'm either going to use silk thread for basting. I have a few colors. We sell a couple of colors on our website just for tailor tacking and hand basting. But I also, of course, use our famous Fusy Web, which we sell by the tons, which is this paper-covered line of glue where I fuse my hems in place, or anything where I'm going to be doing some top stitching or edge stitching, such as this placket on the front that was curved. I'm going to nail this down first with some Fusy Web so that there's nothing shifting on me when I am top stitching or edge stitching. I use a 2.4 millimeter stitch length, so it's dialed down just a little bit, so it's a little bit less in length than the normal stitch that comes out of your sewing machine. And then I do something called melding. So after I've sewn a seam, I will take that seam to the ironing board, or the pressing surface as I like to call it, and I will steam that and press it, and that melds the cotton thread into the linen, and so you hardly know that it's there. And it settles anything down that might be a little bit of a pucker or rumpling that's going on. So remember to meld your stitches, both your stitching in your sewing machine and if you do some serging as well. So the seams that I use mostly, I would say that almost on probably 99.9% of the garments that are hanging on the wall, I'm going to use a regular 5/8 inch seam allowance that I'm stitching with my sewing machine, and then I am serging with 3 threads, not 4. There's no need for that 4th, only 3, using my isocord thread that I've talked about many times in these videos, or silk thread, or the lightweight cotton as my finish, 3-thread finish, when I'm serging those 2 edges together for a seam that presses one direction. Sometimes I'll use a flat fell seam if it's a shirt, for example. Traditional men's shirtings have flat felled seams. Sometimes I might use a French seam, as we do on our Liberty tops sometimes. And then don't forget a good old turn and stitch seam. What I really don't want you to use, if you don't own a serger and you're trying to use a zigzag on the edge of the raw edge of your seam, that tends to leave a little bit of a lump. It never lies really flat. And so I'd rather see you turn each edge in and edge stitch it. So that's called, it's a very classic and old seam finish called turn and stitched. And you still see it in very high-end garments sometimes, on silk blouses, Giorgio Armani blouses, and so forth. So even though it may seem old-fashioned and a little bit home-sewn, I suppose you could say, it's still a really great seam finish to consider. All right, the garment that I have on happens to have 3 miters. 2 miters that are what I call, right angles, and then one that's very asymmetric. I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's very pointed. So we have a little book called Mastering Miters, which I wrote, and this has 7 different mitering techniques in it, all very nicely illustrated with great instructions and good drawings. And the miter that I'm going to talk to you about today is in this book, and then the asymmetric miter is also in this book, and also in the instructions for the Madrid and other garments as well, wherever we have one of those kinds of miters. But I'm going to see if I can do this without completely making this thing fall apart here. So I've talked about making templates, tag board templates, which means using a manila file folder and cutting strips of tag board the width of the hem allowance plus the width of the finished hem. so that you are going to have a hem that's turned down. So once I've used my templates to press my hems in place, then I'm going to stack these two hems on top of one another. You can see that these are the same width hems, and it's going to be a right angle at the corner. At the junction of these two hems, when they're pressed in place, I've placed two pins. One that's perpendicular through a hem allowance, and the other one perpendicular just through this hem allowance as well. So I've made this little X. So I'm going to take this off of here. And now I'm going to bring the miter right sides together, and I'm going to match the two pins at the very edge. And notice that these turn downs stay turned down. So your job is to simply match the pins at the folded edge and make sure that all the edges are lined up straight across. So now, because you have a crease for the hem, I've marked this with a magic marker, which you don't need to do, although you might want to identify it with a line of chalk, something that will disappear. But now that I have my two pins matched up and my edges even, I'm going to draw a line that ends at this point, I'll call it, that's where it dies into the diagonal fold. So I'm going to draw a new line from the pins to this point out here at the outer fold. So that's my sewing line. Coincidentally, this is a right angle. All right. I'm going to use my handy dandy favorite trimming scissors, and I'm going to trim this maybe to about 3/8 of an inch. And now I use either a point presser, a wooden tool, which I meant to have in front of me but don't, or a rail on a tailoring board, and I'm going to take this to the ironing surface and I'm going to press this little seam open. With linen you can finger press it. I'm going to hold my thumb inside the little bonnet of this corner, and I'm going to turn it. And there's my corner. Now, if it needs a little more something in the corner, I might use a point turner. We carry these in both the plastic and the wood, and frankly, I don't know which I like better. I sort of like the feel of the wood in my hands, but I like the shape of this one, so I have both. You know, when you can't decide, you just buy both. But a point turner is not a poker. I am not going to be poking out the corner. I'm using this flat edge to use against the edges of the fold. So that is what forms a better corner. Can you see how I'm giving this some tension at the fold? And I'm not just poking at this. That's the way to get a really good corner, is to use that against the folds. And now I have my perfect miter. Then I would use my fusee web, and I would fuse these hems down so that I could top stitch them whenever we say to in the guide sheet. So, perfect miter. All right, let's talk about hems in linen. When we're making simple shirts, as I've talked about here, whether it's the Whistles or the Florence or the Madrid, these are pretty narrow hems. And sometimes I use two terms that are fairly interchangeable, but I realize they're not quite interchangeable. There's something called a shirt tail hem, and there's something called a handkerchief hem. And I realized after looking it up that a handkerchief hem is a narrow hem that tends to be in long handkerchief length panels on a skirt or a dress that come to a point. A shirt tail hem is more traditional, where it could be straight across, or it can be a high-low hem, where on a shirt it curves up to the side seam. So we're going to talk about them, because both, really. I'm going to use the word handkerchief hem here, but just know that I'm talking about any narrow hem. Now, I've drawn these to be much bigger than what you're going to be doing, because handkerchief and shirt tail hems tend to be from 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch, 5/8 at the most. And of course, the more curve there is to a hem, the narrower you want it, because it's impossible to do a great curved hem that's very wide. So let's assume that this is about 1/2 an inch. So whatever the finished hem allowance or finished hem is going to be, let's choose 1/2 an inch. You're going to stay stitch 1/2 an inch from your raw edge. So this is stay stitching. It looks like basting because I've drawn it that way, but it's a regular stitch length right on that 1/2 inch length. Then I'm going to take this to the ironing surface, and I'm going to use this stay stitching line as my little barrier or guide to press that 1/2 an inch to the wrong side of the fabric. So that keeps this in control, especially if something's a little bit on the bias where it can stretch out. This stay stitching holds things in place, but it also allows you to press an even distance to the wrong side. So then the final stitching is folding this one more time. So now this stitching is up here on top of this hem, and now you're going to, and hidden actually, so now you're going to edge stitch or top stitch right along the upper fold. And notice I didn't say press this. You press the first fold, but you don't press the second fold. That's really too hard to do. But when you sew this, you're going to sew with your needle in a down position. So as you're folding it, the needle is down, and you give it some tension, and that will just roll over. It's like it says, please roll me here. And then you sew a few more inches, needle down, give it some tension, roll it over, stitch some more, and I guarantee you'll have perfect even hems from now on. So that's a narrow hem in linen or cotton, any kind of fabric really, but for sure linen. All right, have I talked about everything? I think so. I do, when I'm pressing garments or pressing the fabric, I do use some interesting sort of spray things. I realize I have some linen spray by Caldrea, but they're out there all over, all kinds of brands, and I like the freshness of something that dampens the fabric. You can use plain water, of course. I keep a spray bottle handy, but I like the idea of a little bit of a fragrance that goes along with pressing my linens. Or you can use a damp press cloth, maybe an old handkerchief that you've dampened and settled in on the linens. But linens are better with moisture. They press better with moisture and pressure. So anything to help that, whether it's a damp press cloth or some sort of spritz, steam, all of that will make your linens really nice and fresh. All right, do we have any questions today?
We do. What do you look out for when buying linen? How can you tell if it's high quality?
The question is, what do you look for when buying linen? How do you know it's high quality? You want a linen that is made with a fairly long filament or staple yarn fiber, so that you don't have a lot of knots or lumps, so it's smooth. You also don't want something that appears to have a finish on it that's creating the support of it, and when you wash it away it becomes just this rag. The linens that we carry here do not have the kinds of finishes. We've been buying a lot of linens. All the ones on the wall except for the print actually have come from a company that specializes in linens for interiors. And being an old interior designer, no, a former interior designer, not an old one, former interior designer, I find that fabrics that you buy through the interior industry are always exceptional quality, better than actually in the apparel industry. So no slubs, no knots, no uneven weave, and you can sometimes tell if there's a finish on it and not some sort of heavy finish.
Does the midweight linen stretch when used for pants?
Does the mid-weight linen stretch? Well, not in theory. Linen is pretty stable, but there is no question but what there is some bagging out in the knees and the back of linen over time. I don't find it to be particularly distressing, but it can happen, and I think that's just a factor in anything that's really tightly woven. Now, Erin, who made these, so these are her mid-weight linen pants, which I've seen her wear a few times in the office, and you know, there's no bagging out here, but I think it has to do with the amount of ease that she's added to the pants as well. So you want the pants to have 4 to 5 inches. I don't even know how much ease you have in these, but at least that probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You want the fabric to drape and hang and be at its most beautiful, and so add that ease. Don't be afraid. Don't think it's going to make you look bigger. It's going to make you look smaller, I'm telling you, than a fitted garment. So if it has enough ease, then I don't believe it's going to bag out. But you could get some bagging out over time as linen begins to break down a little bit.
Do you cut out the linen on the cross grain or the lengthwise?
Do I cut out the linen on the cross grain or the lengthwise grain? Traditionally on the lengthwise grain. I've been known to do it on the cross grain if I don't have enough fabric, but if I have enough fabric, I cut it out on the lengthwise grain.
Do you think if there is stretch, there's anything to do with the quality of the linen, like if it bags out at all? Or?
Do I think that the stretch and the bagging out has anything to do with quality? I do, actually. I've seen a lot of linens that you buy maybe in the chain stores that are the ones that do have the finish, and once the finish is gone, then you see that the weave is loose, and when the weave is loose, it could stretch out more. It could be. There are some linens who are, like this particular pink linen is pretty tightly woven, and I can't, all of these are actually, yeah. That's a tough question to answer. I think that's a little bit of you don't know until it happens sort of thing, but my general sense is that the lesser quality linens are going to be more difficult to control the bagging out.
How do you mark on white linen?
How do I mark on white linen? I might use a tailor tack, but I will use the maybe yellow color of the waxy tracing paper, and it comes out just fine.
Would you make the getaway jeans out of linen?
Would I make the getaway jeans out of linen? Absolutely. They would be fantastic. We do have a black linen that has a lycra in it, if you want a little bit of stretch. But all of the linens that I'm talking about today don't have lycra as an added element to it. But I think the getaway jeans would be fantastic. The Madrid top that I have also comes with a slim pant in the pattern, and that would be great in linen as well.
Is there a reason not to use polyester thread?
Is there a reason not to use polyester thread? Thank you for asking. Yes, I don't use polyester thread on any woven fabrics because when I wind polyester thread on my Bernina winds a bobbin very quickly, amazingly fast, automatically. And so polyester has a stretch to it, has a give to the thread, and so that's going to stretch a little bit as it's winding on the bobbin. So that when I sew with polyester, it's time to relax a little bit, and I tend to get puckers on wovens with polyester thread. The other thing is, when I talked about the melding of thread, when you meld a seam sewn with cotton thread, the thread becomes really integral with the fiber of the linen or cotton or whatever. Polyester thread is always like a very thin wire that just sits on top of the fabric, and you can feel the seam, and I find it to be unpleasant. So polyester is for knits and stretch fabrics, and cotton thread is for all wovens, all fibers.
So do you use a different weight in your bobbin, like a 50 weight cotton?
Do I use a different weight in my bobbin? I use the same weight on the top thread and the bobbin thread, whatever I'm using. So if I'm using 60 weight, it's top and bobbin. If I'm using 50 weight, it's top and bottom. You want to use the same thread, top and bottom, all the time. Same fiber, same brand, same everything. Don't get lazy about that. It's easy to get lazy about that, but don't. It's also easy to get lazy about taking the old thread off your bobbin. You want to start with a fresh bobbin every time and wind whatever you need and just that on your bobbin. And this is all to explain why, really. It's all about the timing of things. You know, the bobbin system in a sewing machine is one of the most expensive parts of a sewing machine to produce. I remember sitting next to Mr. Olchi one time, who's the president of Bernina, and they were introducing the old Bernina 830. Not the old one, the new West 830. And he leaned over and he said, that bobbin system cost me $1 million. And it made me realize how important a bobbin system is, and it's all about the timing of things. So if you're winding multiple different kinds of threads on your bobbin, it's getting sort of gnarled in there, that sets off the timing a little bit differently, and that can create then hitches in the stitch. And when you start doing that, it creates a problem in your bobbin system. That's why we need to clean our machines after every garment, and oil and clean and get all the stuff out of there, because that's all about timing.
Are the rayon linens less scratchy?
Are the rayon linens less scratchy? Not all linens are scratchy. Some are, some aren't. It has to do with the length of the staple yarn. But the linen rayons are not scratchy at all. But every once in a while you run into a linen that is a little bit scratchy. And that's, you can tell by the feel of that sort of from the very beginning. The crisper the linen that comes to you, the chances of it being scratchy, the more chances of it being scratchy.
What temperature do you wash your linen?
Say that again?
What temperature do you
What
wash
temperature
your
do I
linen?
wash my linen? I wash my linens with regular detergent. Well, when I say regular, I do buy a nice sort of ecologically friendly detergent, but I wash it on warm water and dry, sort of normal heat. And I do a delicate cycle, so I'm not really beating it up. But I'm not particularly interested in just cold water and cool drying. I'm going to give it a little bit of heat so that I get whatever shrinkage out of it, whatever excess dye might be in there, which is rare in linen. But you know, you have fabrics that are piece dyed, you have fabrics that are yarn dyed, and most linens are yarn dyed, so that's not really a problem about the color fastness. But medium. And then later I might be washing the garment, and I might use cooler water and no drying.
What is the best weight linen for the Picasso?
What is the best weight linen for the Picasso pants? You know, I don't think it matters. I think it can be this is mid-weight, the stripe, and I have other linen pants in the mid-weight, but boy, you could make them in the lightweight too. But I just think you're thinking about I think the structure of the linen, of the Picassos, is important to maintain. By the way, somebody asked me the other day, this kind of brings this up too, you know, the bottom of the Picasso pants have these separate wedge panels at the bottom. So there's a crosswise seam. And someone asked me if you could combine the bottom wedges with the top and make this all one, which you can. No problem. But I do think that this seam adds to the overall character of the structure of that leg. And so the mid-weight linen is also a reason to retain that shape. So.
Which stitch length do you use to stay stitch the hem?
What stitch length? The 2.4, this is all about stitch length of stay stitching. My 2.4 millimeter stitch length stays with me through the entire garment, from stay stitching to seam stitching to top stitching. I never change my stitch length.
Let's see. Should linens be cut or sewn on the bias?
Should linens be cut or sewn on the bias? Only when the garment is a bias cut design. Otherwise, and that's pretty rare for me, sewing bias is a whole other world of difficulty. And our garments are generally cut on the straight grain. Now, you can see that this seam on the Madrid becomes bias, and so there is some control that has to be maintained here. So when I'm putting this band on this particular garment, I'm making sure that I have retained this length. I'm referring back to my pattern piece and making sure that this piece is not grown before I put this straight band on it. But in terms of should it be cut on the bias, no, it can be, but it's not like it should be.
Why did you line the floral pants? For drape or modesty?
Why did I line the floral pants? That was for modesty. That was a pretty thin fabric, and I wanted a little modesty. Yes.
Okay. Do you ever stay stitch the crotch curve to prevent stretching?
Do I ever stay stitch the crotch curve to prevent stretching? The answer is no. By the time, first of all, I use a walking foot or the even feet feature on my sewing machine, so things are not growing as I'm sewing them. So once I've sewn the crotch, then when I sew a second row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch away through the crotch area, and then I'm serging that seam, and that's pretty stable. That's about as stable as you can get, and I'm making sure it's not stretching out when I'm sewing it. So I don't think there's any need to stay stitch.
Is it good to use the sergers on linen seams?
Is it good to use the serger on linen seams? I never use the serger as the seam finish. For instance, I'm not taking 2 pieces of fabric, making a garment, and just 3 or 4 threads serging as my seam. I'm going to sew the seam first and then use the serger as a finish, 3 thread. The reason for that is I want to make sure that my stitching is precisely on the seam allowance so that I have the original fit, and, well, it's all about fit really. And then when you just use a serger as a seam finish and you press it, that creates a lump. That's like some sort of a 1/4 inch tube that's underneath your seam. I don't think you want that. You want your seam to lie flat, and I do that with by using the isocord thread for my serger, so that doesn't create a lump either. It's very thin. So no, I never use my serger as a seam only.
Okay, how difficult is it to match the bottom part of the Picasso in the striped fabric?
Oh, how difficult is it to match the striped fabric, the bottom part of the Picasso in the striped fabric? Not that hard. When I lay this out, I take the pattern piece for the bottom and cut it right below the top so that I am literally butting the 2 tissue pattern pieces together, so I know that I'm matched. And I'm extending the match line. I'm drawing a line, tracing through the tissue pattern of the top and tracing it down to the bottom, so I know I have an exact match.
Okay.
And then, of course, when sewing it, that's a time when you could use your fusee web to glue your seams together to make sure you're matching it before you ever sew it. It's a good time to use that.
Okay, and a question about the cotton and lycra, the black cotton and lycra, and you want to tell them again which patterns to use for that.
Okay, a question about the black cotton and lycra, which we also have in navy, by the way. What patterns to use? So I've used the Picasso Pants. I would make Hudson Pants. I would make Valencia Pants. And then I would make certain tops, but not so much of a shirt. Perhaps more of a light jacket, like a Tremont jacket, if I wanted a great summer black jacket, maybe a London shirt that I'm wearing as a jacket. But I think that fabric is just pretty universal for any of our pants. Oh, it'd make great Madrid pants, make great getaway jeans. Did I say that before? I might have. Yeah.
Okay, it looks like all the questions we have.
All right. Well, I think next week we're going to talk about necklines. I've had a lot of questions about increasing the sizes of necklines, V-necks, and so forth. So at this point, that's what I'm thinking about, but I do appreciate all your questions because it really helps me plan for the next Facebook Live session, which we will have a week from now. So thanks for joining us.